327 Federal Magnum revolver and all the cartridges that it can safely chamber and fire. I'm going to do a ballistic test with all three of them, and I know what people are going to say, there's 5. Let's talk about that a little bit, and then we'll get to testing them. Now, I've done a lot of research on the 327 Federal Magnum revolver, and what you often see is people will say it's a 5-cartridge revolver that can fire the 327 Federal Magnum, 32 H&R Magnum, 32 Smith & Wesson Long, the 32 Smith & Wesson, and the 32 ACP. And they say that they're all interchangeable, and especially for the revolver cartridges, they say that the case is all the same diameter except for length and powder charge. Well, that's not quite correct. And before I get into much talking, I know that somebody's going to come on here and say, yes, I have fired 32 ACP through my 327 revolver and 32 Smith & Wesson. I had no problems. But we need to talk a little bit about the specifications of these cartridges and why it might not be a good idea to fire 2 of those 5 cartridges, and why I think these 3 are the compatible cartridges. Now, when you open a user manual for this LCR 327 Federal, and I believe it would be the same for all of Ruger's 327 Federal Magnum revolvers, it says that the cartridges that it can safely chamber and fire are the 327 Federal Magnum, the 32 H&R Magnum, and the 32 Smith & Wesson Long, and it stops at that. And I think there's some very good reasons for that. Now, when we look at these 3 cartridges, they are almost all identical as far as most of the specifications, except for overall length. I do believe the 32 Smith & Wesson Long has a slightly different base diameter right above the rim here, but it's so close it doesn't even really matter. What's very important, though, is they all share a rim thickness of 5.5 1/100ths of an inch. That's extraordinarily important. Now, the 32 Smith & Wesson and the 32 ACP do not share that rim thickness. They are 4.5 1/100ths of an inch instead of 5.5 1/100ths of an inch. So what could happen, and I got to explain kind of how this works here. When you put a correct rim thickness cartridge in a revolver that it's chambered for, what's going to happen is there's just enough room for that rotation of that cylinder, and then between the back of the cartridge and the frame there's basically no room. So what's going to happen is, imagine this right here is the back of your cartridge or your firing pin. Your firing pin hits it. And what's going to happen, it's going to set that round off, and that cartridge will move back a little bit as it's firing. But that's not really going to cause any issue because it's correctly fitting. Now what's going to happen is if you put a 32 Smith & Wesson or a 32 ACP cartridge in it, because it's 4.5 1/100ths of an inch, there's more wiggle room there. So imagine again, this is the back of the cartridge, firing pin hits it. What's going to happen is as it's firing, there's enough room for the cartridge to come push back while the firing pin is still up. So it hits it, goes off, pushes it back. So what you'll see, if you do shoot a bunch of 32 ACP or 32 Smith & Wesson, is you'll have much deeper primer dimples than normal. And worst case scenario is that that firing pin will go right through that primer. So you can get a total primer blowout, which is probably not a good thing. And there's a couple other things that are off spec as well. Like the 32 ACP, the rim diameter around is smaller, so extraction is a little bit questionable. And also with the 32 ACP, we're dealing with a bullet that is slightly bigger around than all the other 4. It's 0.3125 instead of 0.3120. So from all the information that I'm reading, what I'm seeing is you can probably get away with firing all 5, but these 3 are the only ones that I consider truly compatible. And the most important thing when it comes to that as well is that when we look at, let's take for instance the 4 revolver cartridges that are available, 32 Smith & Wesson, 32 Smith & Wesson Long, 32 H&R, and 327. The most available ammunition is 32 Smith & Wesson Long. It's also the least expensive. So you can easily find 50 round boxes of 32 Smith & Wesson Long that you can't find anywhere else with the other cartridges. So it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to go down to the 32 Smith & Wesson, because when you do find it, it's more money than the 32 Smith & Wesson Long. And the other 2, typically you can't find 50 round boxes, but anywhere you look, you pretty much find 32 Smith & Wesson Long. It's still pretty popular. And the price for 50 rounds is really not much different than 38 Special. So it's available. There's lots of rounds. You can fire through it. 50 round boxes. It's totally 2-spec pretty much. Not going to be an issue. So why go down to 32 Smith & Wesson? Why go down to 32 ACP? And I think a lot of that might come down to, well, somebody gave me this ammo and I had this ammo for 20 years, or I found a great deal on this ammo, so I bought it. You can probably get away with firing a lot of it, but if it were me, I wouldn't do it. So I'm going to fire what I consider very common of these three cartridges. This is the MagTech 98 grain semi-jacketed hollow point, rated at 778. I wrote it down. Out of a 4-inch barrel. This is the 32 H&R Magnum Federal. It's an XTP bullet, 85 grain, loaded by Federal. Very popular round. 11-20 feet per second out of a 5-inch barrel. And this 327 Federal Magnum Gold Dot, rated at 1600 feet per second, is a 100 grain bullet, but there's no barrel length listed. So I think these are going to be very comparable. Not comparable one to the other, but very common cartridges, comparable to what you might find out there. And I'm not going to test stuff like 32 H&R Mag Plus PA, because that is not a cartridge at all according to SAMI or CIP. They're all within regulated specifications, so they're going to be safe to fire. So we're going to go out and shoot the ballistic box with all three of these and see how they compare one to the other. So let's go outside and get started with the test.
Now we're going to test these rounds of ammunition between the 32 Smith & Wesson Long, 32 H&R Magnum, and 327 Federal Magnum. Now I did find a little bit more information after filming the first part of this video, and what I found is that 32 Smith & Wesson by SAMI specifications, also in my reloading manual, does show a rim thickness of 0.054, so almost the same as these three. However, lots and lots of research I found that that's not how they're loaded currently. All the manufacturers that actually load them nowadays load them with a rim thickness anywhere between 0.040 and 0.045. So they're loading them different spec than the original for whatever reason. My suspicion would be that probably because those old top brick revolvers that take that round might be kind of tight fitting for the original loadings with corrosion and all that, but that's just a guess. So we're going to go through the chronograph, see what kind of velocity and accuracy we get with all these rounds out of the LCP. Then we're going to go through the Juggernaut box, which contains a 1 3/4 inch pack of bologna covered by 4 layers of denim, followed by 1/4 inch medium density fiberboards into water jugs to catch that projectile. Kind of simulates flesh and clothing. And my testing, what that represents comparison to ballistics gel, is back of the first jug. If we put a big mark out the back of that, that's about 9 inches of penetration compared to 20% ballistics gel. Back of the second jug, 12 inches. Back of the third, 15 inches, and so on. And I've confirmed that with many different tests that I've seen other people do with 20% ballistics gel. So very close to what I'm going to get for penetration in my water jug test. So let's get started with the test and see how they all compare. All right, first round is going to be the 32 Smith & Wesson Long, 98 grain jacketed hollow point by MagTech. About 5 yards from the target, about 4 yards from the chronograph. See what we get for velocity and accuracy. 750. 822. 813. 791. And need to put another round in there. My bad, I'm not editing that out. Alright, one more. 748. So pretty close to the rate of velocity of a 4-inch barrel, but through the snub nose. Recoil was none, absolutely none. It felt about like a 22. Let's see how the 32 H&R Magnum compares. 32 H&R Magnum, 85 grain, jacketed hollow point. See what kind of velocity we get. 865. 885. 882. 863. 858. So really consistent velocity, real consistent accuracy. The recoil wasn't much more. Probably 10% more. It's more of the sound that I'm hearing that's a little bit more. Let's see how the 327 Federal Magnum compares. 327 Federal Magnum, significantly higher rate of velocity, 100 grain bullet. Let's see how this does. 1329. 1324. 1342. 1342. 1294. Now between the 32 Smith & Wesson long, feeling like about like a 22, the 32 H&R Magnum felt like about like a 22 Magnum. The jump and recoil to the 327 is like going from a 22 Magnum to a 357 Magnum. Significant jump and recoil. But still a little bit less than a 357 Magnum, but not by a whole lot. Let's hit the ballistic box and see how they all compare to each other. Alright, first up is the 32 Smith & Wesson long. We'll see how this does. So here we go. Alright. The fiberboard is still up there. We went right through that baloney pack, and there's actually more damage to this baloney pack than what I would have actually expected. I see a lot of 38 special hollow points make about that damage. Entrance, exit. Let's see what we got in water jugs. Alright, first jug, pretty good amount of damage through both sides of this water jug. We're hitting jug 2. And it appears we went right through 2. I see an impact on 3. I see an impact on 4, just barely leaking a little bit. But the bullet is in jug 3, and there's dent out the back of jug 3. That's a perfect 15 inches of penetration if it were to be ballistics gel. And I'm surprised that this as well, we did have expansion. So this met the absolute perfect amount of penetration. It expanded. It caused pretty good amount of damage to the baloney saw. This is not what I would have expected with this round. This is doing really well compared to the recoil of about a 22 long rifle. That's impressive, to say the least. Let's see how the 32 H&R Magnum compares. Alright, Federal 32 H&R Mag, we'll see how this does. 85 grain XTP bullet. Alright, nice accurate shot here. And what we have through the baloney pack looks close, but it actually looks like a little bit less damage to the baloney than the 32 Smith & Wesson long. So let's see what we got in water jugs. Alright, first jug has more damage to the side of this jug than the 32 Smith & Wesson long. Cracked it just a little bit. Jug 2. We're going through jug 2. Impact point looks a little bit to the right compared to the initial impact. Jug 3, and we have a dent out the back of jug 3, about the same as the 32 Smith & Wesson long, so we definitely have that same 15 inches of penetration if it were to be ballistics gel. And here's that XTP bullet. Not too impressive, not as much expansion as the 32 Smith & Wesson long, but it did expand a little bit and it did slow it down, so I would say overall pretty good performance with this as well. Now let's see how the 327 Federal Magnum Gold Dot compares to these two. Alright, 327 Federal Magnum Gold Dot. We'll see how this compares. And I get hit in the face with quite a bit of water. The baloney pack separated from the rest of the pack. Here's the fiberboard. We have a little bit larger hole. Now let's see what we got in water jugs. Alright, there's baloney all over the place here. The first water jug exploded like any other Magnum 357, stuff like that. Jug 2, a little more damage than the other two. And it appears that we're drifting a little bit to the right here. Impact on jug 3. It looks like it drifted out the side here, hit the side of the box. And it's in the box before it hit jug 4. Now for penetration, I'd probably give it about 16 to 17 inches because it did hit the side of the box. I think it would have went into jug 4, but we have perfect gold dot flowering expansion. Very impressive round. So all these rounds, how do I think they compare First of all, I'm going to say the 32 H&R Magnum Federal wasn't that great. It did its job. It did its job pretty well. Got adequate penetration, but it didn't have very impressive expansion. And the recoil is a little bit more than the 32 Smith & Wesson Long. The 32 Smith & Wesson Long, on the other hand, had less recoil than the rest of these, and for its recoil had the best performance. So I'd say that's a really, really good round. If you're going to want to go to a low recoil round, I would say that Magtech 38 Special Semi-Jacketed Hollow Point is going to be the go-to round. It's just phenomenal round the way it performed to its recoil. Now, of course, the 327 Federal Magnum provided the most damage. We had the most expansion, just the most impressive round overall, and it would indeed probably have the most man-stopping power, if you will. However, the recoil was about 4 times that of the Smith & Wesson Long. So you have to kind of deal with that recoil, deal with that muzzle rise, as where that 32 Smith & Wesson Long is not very loud at all. Very easy to control, very good performance. So you can get a lot of shots off pretty easily with that. That's where the 327 going to be pretty loud. So that's what you get today, comparing all 3 of these rounds, the rounds that I think you should fire in your 327 Magnum revolvers. I would skip the 32 Smith & Wesson and 32 ACP and go with these 3. So as always, comment, share, and like, and thanks for watching.